At our best, America has led. We have led by our example as a shining city on a hill. We have led by giving voice to the voiceless.
At some point in this new century, we lost track of our national values.
But they are more partisan, more tribal, more of the time than at any time that I can remember. We've all played some role in it.
More than 4 in 5 American adults believe the future of American democracy is under serious threat.
We've seen an assault on our democracy like we've never seen.
We're coming after you. You will be served lead.
From attacks on everyday Americans at the forefront of protecting democracy to the erosion of trust in our institutions.
Democracies don't fight each other.
When tribalism takes over a political system, that becomes very dangerous because you start to see everything through your group's lens.
I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country.
These are such hard conversations that we shouldn't be having to have.
John McCain would say that we can't give up on working together.
We have a moral obligation to continue in our just cause, and we would bring more than shame on ourselves if we don't.
Reconciliation is not easy.
These are extraordinary times, and we face an extraordinary challenge.
Freedom itself is dependent on the strength and vitality of our national character.
But this is not just an issue for us here in the United States. This is an issue for nascent democracies around the world.
But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.
Courage, leadership, character.
Preserve, protect, and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Empathy.
By understanding that we may have different stories, but we hold common hopes.
Beyond politics. The McCain Institute's Defending American Democracy virtual event series will cultivate those forward-seeking conversations. Transcend politics. Move forward together, rebuilding our city on a hill.
Do not despair of our present difficulties. We believe always in the promise and greatness of America. Americans never quit. We never surrender. We never hide from history. We make history.
Hello, everyone. You should be inspired now. I'm Evelyn Farkas. I'm the executive director of the McCain Institute. Every day we are inspired and motivated by the late, great Senator McCain. We are committed to fulfilling his legacy, to furthering, to promoting democracy, human rights, and character-driven leadership in the work that we do in Washington, D.C., in Arizona, and around the world. We are committed to serving causes greater than ourselves. Our vision is a world that is free, safe, and just for all people. I'm pleased today to join you all here and to introduce today's fifth Democracy Dialogue of the McCain Institute. This series of conversations is partially funded by the Knight Foundation, and we thank them, and specifically Ashley Zone, who's here with us today. She's the Vice President for Learning and Impact. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to the Knight Foundation. Our 4 prior conversations have focused on how the decline and disappearance of local journalism is endangering our democracy, the implications of physical and verbal threats against election officials, how to protect our electoral systems and infrastructure against cyber attacks, and how to counter hate in America today. You can find all of these on YouTube, and this one will also be on YouTube after tonight. For our 5th today, we're going to talk about political courage and why it's essential, but more on that in a second. Let me tell you why we're convening these meetings. These high-level democracy dialogues showcase women and men of character. We engage those who stand up every day in defense of democratic rights of all Americans. And through their service, through their example, point to the obligations of citizenship that, of course, we all have. And these leaders, like our inspiration and namesake, Senator John McCain, lead with integrity, humility, and civility. And as we all know, these three things, unfortunately, sadly, are in short supply today in America. You, our young leaders of tomorrow, are the ones we're fighting for. But ultimately, it's up to you to fight as well, to fight for your democracy, to fight for your rights. Representative Liz Cheney, whom you're about to hear from, is the epitome of American political courage today. She followed her values, even though it meant sacrificing her career and risking her physical security. She asserted, quote, "If the cost of standing up for the Constitution is losing the House seat, then that's a price I'm willing to pay," end quote. That is the definition of integrity: acting consistently in keeping with one's values, regardless of the cost to oneself, and following where that lead takes you, where that leads takes courage. Representative Cheney has in effect put us Americans ahead of her personal and professional interests. And for that, we must thank her. And now, it is my honor to introduce Representative Liz Cheney, committed conservative, Wyoming's member of Congress, they have one, and Vice Chair of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. And with her today is Sofia Gross, who will be interviewing her. She is the McCain Institute's inaugural John S. McCain Democracy Fellow, who until recently was the head of policy partnerships and social impact at the social media company Snap. And she's currently also a Navy Reserve officer. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Representative Cheney, and over to you, Sofia.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you to the McCain Institute, and thank you to ASU. Good afternoon, and again, welcome to the McCain Institute's Dialogues on the Future of U.S. Democracy. These dialogues and the Institute's Defending American Democracy program are made possible by the generosity of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. Today's conversation is themed around courage in American leadership, and there's nobody that further exemplifies this theme than Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who we are so thrilled to have with us this evening. And the McCain Institute, our hope is to inspire more young Americans, the next generation of Americans here in Arizona, to understand their role in the democratic process in using their voice this midterm election cycle and beyond. It is a true honor to conduct tonight's conversation at a continually critical moment in American history. When I first got the news of this opportunity to lead tonight's conversation, the key word that kept coming to mind was courage. My hope is that in sharing your story and your values and your principles, that more young Americans in this room understand that no matter who they are or where they come from, they can and must be involved with public life in order to help shape the trajectory of our country. It's something that Senator John McCain helped me understand when I was a young person in a room just like this, and it changed the rest of my life. We all have a role to play, and often that role takes courage. I hope we all walk away from our conversation this evening with that deep understanding and inspiration to do more in public life. I also do want to note that today's conversation is taking place on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year. For me personally, as a proud Jew and great-granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, I think it's really so meaningful and so powerful to have this conversation on this day. Yom Kippur is about reflection and our ability to improve, both as individual people and as a collective community. Today, in theme with the holiday of Yom Kippur, we will have the opportunity to reflect on our country through the lens of how we can improve it and ask ourselves who we want to be as citizens and as a nation as we embark in this next year. I know Congresswoman Cheney will help us do just that. As part of our Arizona Democracy Program, we are looking forward to conducting tonight's conversation to honor the legacy of Senator McCain. It will be a civil conversation where we welcome opposing views and embrace difficult conversations, but ultimately one that is respectful and rooted in our ability to listen to one another. I hope you in the audience will join us in honoring Senator McCain's legacy and making this a civil conversation. With that, Congresswoman Cheney will begin with her remarks, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for your service to our country. And thank you to the McCain Institute. It's really a special pleasure and honor and privilege to be here to honor the legacy of Senator McCain and what he did for so many years for the issue of democracy. And it's a special privilege and honor to be here to talk about our obligation as citizens in a republic and our obligations as citizens in a democratic system. I've had the opportunity over the last year and a half to spend a lot of time with young people, and young people really give me hope when I look at the future of our country. And I see this beginning with the young members of the staff in the Capitol on January 6th. And watching how in so many instances where the member who they may have been working for was unwilling to, for example, speak clearly about what had happened, was unwilling to stand up to what had happened. The young people really have. And I see that with my children, with their friends, and I see that all around the country. And that really just gives me tremendous hope. And I think one of the biggest lessons for me, and this may seem obvious, I grew up certainly around politics. I grew up in a family that was involved in public service. But the lesson of January 6th and of what we've seen since then is one of the most important lessons undoubtedly is that in this nation, our institutions don't defend themselves. And it takes individuals. If you look at what we've seen, there have been far too many examples of cowardice. There have been far too many examples of sort of craven political ambition in the last year and a half, but there have also been stunning examples of bravery and courage. And the people of Arizona are blessed to have so many of those examples here. People like Rusty Bowers, who testified in front of our committee. And I will tell you, sitting there on the dais and listening to Rusty talk about his faith and talk about his duty to the Constitution and his oath and what it meant to him was incredibly moving for me and for my colleagues. And so Arizona and our nation owes Rusty a tremendous debt of gratitude. Also individuals like Stephen Risher, who I believe is here with us today, and Bill Gates, both of whom have been tremendously strong and courageous. And we've seen that it was courageous Republicans who withstood pressure from the former president at all levels and who have been willing to come forward and tell the truth about what happened. And so if anybody says to you, January 6th wasn't all that bad, the institutions held, please tell them they only held because of people and because of Americans who stepped forward. And they held because of political elected officials. They also held because of the Capitol Police officers, the Metropolitan Police officers, the men and women who fought
what was really a medieval battle, hand-to-hand combat that day for hours and hours. And just remember, and I know we're going to have the chance to do questions here, but think to yourself what it means that for 187 minutes, while there was a massive battle and assault underway at the Capitol, and police officers were being gravely injured, were killed. While this battle was going on, thousands of people armed who'd been provoked by President Trump to attack the Capitol. While this was happening, Donald Trump was watching it on television and he refused to take action. He was the one person who could have stopped it, who ultimately did when he told people to go home, but he wouldn't tell them to leave for 187 minutes. And no matter what else you think about what happened that day, no matter what else you think about our politics in this nation, no nation can afford to have a leader who's so derelict in his duty. And I think that's one of the things that we all need to remember from that day. So I look forward to Sofia's questions, and I look forward then to questions from our audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Cheney. So very inspiring, and I'm very excited to continue our conversation. I'd love to start by talking about the current moment that we find ourselves in. We're defending a free and fair election in the United States of America in the year 2022 is considered courageous. Liz Cheney is on everybody's mind. I'd love to know what's on your mind. What are you thinking about as you continue to work each day to defend our democracy in the face of ongoing domestic threats?
Well, I spend a lot of time thinking about Arizona. If you think about elections that are happening now, in Arizona today, you have a candidate for governor in Kari Lake. You have a candidate for Secretary of State in Mark Finchem, both of whom have said, this isn't a surprise, it's not a secret, they both said that they will only honor the results of an election if they agree with it. Both of them have looked at 2020. They've looked at the fact that the election here in Arizona was carried out according to state law, that there were counts, that there were recounts, that there were audits, that there were multiple court cases and rulings, all of which went against the former president. The election itself was certified, and the Arizona electors were correctly certified for Biden. They've looked at all of that, the law, the facts, and the rulings of the courts, and they've said it doesn't matter to them. And if you care about democracy and you care about the survival of our republic, then you need to understand, we all have to understand that we cannot give people power who have told us that they will not honor elections. Elections are the foundation of our republic, and peaceful transfers of power are the foundation of our republic. And we must have elected officials in both parties who understand and honor that duty and that responsibility. So what happens here in Arizona is not just important for Arizona, but it's important for the nation and for the future functioning of our constitutional republic.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really is why we're so honored to have you here today, to embark and make sure that everybody in this room hears that message and understands that this democracy is theirs for the taking, and that we all have a role to play. One thing I love about when I listen to you speak is really about how much history influences your thinking. So I'd love to take, a little bit of a look back. The peaceful transition of power we've seen for almost 250 years in this nation as a beacon of hope for democracies around the world, and a critical part of Senator John McCain's legacy was his grace when he was running for the highest office in the land. And we like to say that history does repeat itself. And when it comes to January 6th, that is quite a frightening concept. And so I'd love to know, how do you reflect on American history as you shape your approach to navigating power today?
It's such an important question. And I think, the first thing that we have to understand is that we've never been where we are before. We've never been at a place where we're facing this kind of a threat. And that's because we're facing a threat from a former president who is attempting to unravel the republic. And it can sound extreme to say. I can't imagine that. I could not have imagined that that would be where we are. I spent a lot of time in my career working in countries overseas where they don't live under governments that are free. I actually worked at the International Republican Institute. This will age me, but 30 years ago, I was a young staffer when John McCain was, I believe at that time, chairman of the board of IRI. And so I've seen firsthand how fragile democracy is and how the sacrifice that people are willing to make for it around the world. And I think I knew on some level that even in the United States, this was fragile, but I certainly didn't understand just how fragile. And I think that's such an important lesson that we need to take from history. I think, you know, the other lesson we need to take from history, and I think about Lincoln a lot. I think about my great-great-grandfather who served in the Union Army for all 4 years of the Civil War. And you think about over so many generations who sacrificed so much for this freedom. And we cannot be the generation that decides we're going to let it slip away. And that does require all of us. Sofia talked about the young people in the audience today, young people around the country. And, you know, I know when you're 18, 19, 20, and you sort of look at the big federal government or the big state government, and you think, my gosh, there's no way that I could ever have an impact. There's no way that I could make a difference. And I hope if you leave here with one message today, it's that the only thing that ever does make a difference is individuals. And if you look at every great thing that has ever been accomplished in our country or anywhere around the world, frankly, it's because of the courage and the conviction and the dedication of individuals. And it's a duty that we have. And you can make a difference, and we need you to make a difference. We need you to step forward. We need you to run for office. And we also need you to be educated voters. And educated voters, and this isn't just young people, this is all Americans. You know, we live in a society right now where we argue about what the truth is. And I see this, especially with respect to the January 6th hearings and my Republican colleagues' response to them, which is often to say, well, those are just partisan. And then you will ask them, well, have you watched any of the hearings? And they say, no, we actually haven't watched them. And everyone has an obligation to educate yourselves. Everybody has an obligation to know that, you know, it is the former Attorney General, Donald Trump's Attorney General, Donald Trump's White House counsel, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Donald Trump's campaign attorneys. Those are the people who told him there was not fraud. The claims that you're making about fraud are not true. And people need to recognize and understand what the truth is. There's a tremendous effort underway to lie, to spread the big lie. And I would just urge you, as you're thinking about your future careers and what you're going to do, number one, please run for office because we really need you to do that. And number two, be educated voters. And when you go in and to cast your vote, think about the serious challenges our nation faces and vote for serious people. Vote for people who are going to deal with those challenges in a way that's worthy of the country and that's up to the challenge, not the person who's going to get the most likes on Twitter or Facebook, but vote for serious people that you can feel confident will do the right thing.
It's such an important point, and I would just say, when I was a freshman in college and I showed up to vote for the first time, I thought I had it all figured out. And I was a pretty big civic nerd, but turned out that you voted for a lot more than just president. And it was a very disenfranchising feeling. And voting should really feel like this immensely empowering, positive experience. And so as all of you in the room prepare to make your plans to vote in a few weeks, just make sure that you look up who's going to be on your ballot. do some of your homework ahead of time so that way when you show up to vote, it doesn't feel like a test that you didn't get the chance to study for. There's an amazing resource, ballotready.org, that will literally show you, based on your zip code, what your sample ballot will look like and who all of your options are. I highly recommend it. And then similar to what Congresswoman Cheney has said, if you show up to vote and there aren't people running based on the things that you believe in or that you care about, you can run. And so if there's anybody here who would love to talk about that more, I would love to follow up because it's such an important message. And if you care about education, there are real roles in your community that you can run for and make a difference on those issues. I love that you brought up freedom, and it was something that I was going to ask you. My great-grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, did not have the freedom of her own destiny until she came to this country. I often think of the next generation, many of whom are in this room, and I worry a bit. I'm not sure how much young Americans truly do appreciate the gift that it means to be an American. And I'm wondering how you think we can help support them in understanding just how powerful that is.
It's such an important question. And, you know, when you talk about your great grandmother, I was talking to a young woman several weeks ago in Wyoming who told me a similar story, that it was her grandparents who had escaped the Holocaust actually and come to the United States. And she said to me something that was so powerful, because she said, you know, they had the United States to come to, but I'm worried about what happens if we let our democracy slip away here. Where will people go? Where do we have to look to? And I think that's a very real, it's a very real and serious concern. And I also think, you know, we don't do, and I say this as a mother, we don't do the kind of job we need to do in our schools, teaching our children about the magnificence, the exceptionalism of this great country. And, you know, we ask so much of young people when we sort of say to them, all right, now it's your turn to step up. It's your turn to do everything you can to defend the freedoms that we have. And if we haven't taken the time to educate people about this country, then people aren't equipped. And it's especially important in America. You know, we're the only nation in history founded on ideals of freedom. And if you think about, you know, why we love America, we love her because she's our country. But paraphrasing Lincoln, he said, we love her even more because she's free. And that means we have to educate ourselves and understand not just what that freedom, how that benefits us, but also how our constitutional structure works to defend that freedom, and why it's so important, for example, that we abide by the rulings of the courts, why it's such a constitutional and legal offense for a president to fail to execute the laws, to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. That's his obligation under the Constitution. And we have to make sure that our young people understand what the Constitution is, what it means, and how it functions, and why it's so critically important to protect our freedoms, but also it's the framework for us to expand those freedoms. And if you look back through our history, it is not a perfect history. Certainly you did not begin in a way that was perfect, far from it. But it's through the Constitution that those rights and freedoms have been expanded and extended. And I think that's the fundamentally important lesson as well.
Absolutely. And I love the notion that we have the freedom in this country to criticize it in the hopes of making it even better, and just how lucky we are to have the opportunity to do that in this nation. As much as Democrats love to claim that you are their own, you are a very proud conservative.
I don't know how much they love claiming that, but
what does this mean for our political process and the two-party system, especially for this notion of civility? Will we ever see the days of bipartisanship again? And what do you think the future of all of this looks like?
yeah, I never imagined that I would, you know, find myself spending so much time with Democrats. And I'm sure they are surprised to be spending so much time with me also.
At least it's mutual.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But look, I'm very proud of the work that we've done on the select committee, for example, and I'm very proud of the way that it has been. It's been, if anything in Congress can be nonpartisan, it's been nonpartisan. And you know, what we've been able to do is set aside our battles about politics and our battles about policy. And I don't mean to minimize those because they're very real and we have very real disagreements, but we all recognize that the foundation on which you can have those policy debates is the Constitution. And so we have really worked as a committee. And if you watch, you know, we've done some very clear things. We don't have the process at our hearings where each member speaks for 5 minutes. And that really has allowed us to have the focus be on the facts for the American people. But we also aren't taking pot shots at each other from the dais and trying to score political points. And I think that's been very important. I also think, you know, when I think back to, for example, when my dad was in Congress, you know, in the late 70s and in the 80s, Washington was a place where families came. And, you know, members brought their families to Washington for the most part. We would go home during the summer and on the weekends, but during the school year, the families were in Washington. And it makes a big difference when you spend time with each other's families and when you spend time with each other and, you know, you're engaging with human beings and you're remembering that even if we have differences and disagreements, we have a lot to learn from each other. The members of Congress that I respect the most right now, in addition to those I serve with on the select committee, are some of the women who are veterans, who are Democrats, who I serve with on the Armed Services Committee. People like Alyssa Slotkin and Chrissy Houlihan, Elaine Luria, Abigail Spanberger is not on the Armed Services Committee, but she's another member I have huge respect for. They're Democrats. I think Abigail Spanberger and I, we agree on a lot, we disagree on a lot, but I know those women are serious and I know that they will deal in substance and I know we can have a debate and we'll learn and we can agree, you know, we're not going to agree on this, we're going to agree on that and we can work together. And I just think everybody should be represented by people that, you know, are going to do that kind of hard work. And we ought to demand that from our elected officials.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up family and I'd love to get a little bit personal.
Great.
There are many young women in the room. In addition to being an American leader, you are a woman, you are a daughter, you're a sister, and you're a mother. How do all these identities make you the person you are? And how do you do it all? What practical advice do you have to young women who aspire to drive change while also having a family life of their own? Also, selfishly, I'm getting married in May, so I will welcome any pro tips you have.
Wow. I think about how my kids would answer that question. And well, I guess I would say several things. My mom and dad did something that I'm still in awe of. And that was they somehow conveyed to Mary and to me that the most important thing that was going on in our lives was happening at the dinner table, was happening at home. And, you know, my dad certainly was not there all the time. My mom wasn't there sometimes too, obviously. They both had very busy careers, but there was a grounding and a sense of this matters and what we're talking about matters. They also always talked to us like adults and engaged us in the conversation and engaged us in their work and taught us what it meant to be involved in something that was bigger than just us. I think makes a big difference. I also think that there are basic characteristics and traits that govern our personal lives that also should govern our professional lives. And I think about this too in terms of national security issues and foreign policy. People sometimes will say, national security is so complicated and diplomacy is so complicated. And I always think on some level, certainly it is, but you know, there are some basic lessons that you learn as a mother that apply also in national security situations, like empty threats diminish your power and influence. I have a whole list of these.
So good.
But and I at one point I was thinking about writing a book about this, and I had a whole bunch of chapters about, you know, how motherhood trains you for national security policy. And I went through the chapter headings with my husband, and he said, you know, if you write that book, people will think that you think our children are Hezbollah. I said, okay, maybe I won't do that. But in all seriousness, though, you know, I look at the change that's happening around the world today. I was just before I came over here, I saw a video that's been posted of a girls' school in Iran, where the school leaders had brought in a member of the IRGC to talk to the young women. And the video is of the young women tearing off their head coverings and twisting them in the air and yelling at him to leave, go home, go home. And you see this tremendous movement across Iran that's being led by young women. And I see the young women in our country today. And I think about people like Cassidy Hutchinson, people like Sarah Matthews, young women who, when faced with this unbelievable situation where you had a president of the United States attempting to steal an election, and they have come in and they have testified in front of our committee in a way that just shows tremendous bravery and courage. So I just think I'm so proud of what women have accomplished and are accomplishing across the country. I want more women to run for office. And the last thing I would say about this is women very often when they come to see me and say, all right, I want to run for office, you know, let's talk about this. Women will come and they'll have a list often, and they'll say things like, well, I've never fundraised before, or I've never done public speaking, or I've never gone door to door. They'll have a list of things that they've never done or they don't know how to do. And I have never had a single man come to me with a list like that. The men don't make the lists of what they don't know how to do. And
Shocking.
yeah. But so one really important message for young women is that the men have no idea what they're doing either. And so just, you know, it's smart to have a sense of what you need to know and what you don't know, but you just have to do it. You just have to jump in, and we really need you to do that. We need you to jump in, and we need you to run for office. It's crucially important for the country.
I think that should be an applause. Well, again, selfishly, I do hope you write that book. And now I can only imagine what the dinner table conversation was
I'll
like.
give you my list of chapters.
This is going to be my last question. So for the audience, I hope you have your questions ready. Senator John McCain so deeply valued country over party. One of the things I also worry about is how the phrase of patriotism has now been perceived as a Republican thing, and it's really only one party. And one of the things I'd love for you to reflect on, especially in front of an audience of young people, is, you know, what does patriotism mean? One of the things that I think a lot about is if you love something, you want to help it grow. And sometimes that does mean criticizing it in order to help it be the thing you know it can be. So how should we think through patriotism and what it means to be a patriot?
Well, I think that being a patriot means first and foremost loving our country more. That we can say to each other, we're Democrats, we're Republicans, but we love our country more, and that we'll act in accordance with that. And that means that you put your love of country above politics, you put it above your political career, and that we recognize that patriotism in America really is also allegiance to a fundamental sense of human freedom, of inalienable rights from God, that the Constitution protects. The government doesn't give us those rights. I think that this is also something that Senator McCain really stood for. And that is that because America is a nation based upon a fundamental belief in human freedom, that gives us an obligation to help to defend freedom around the world. We can't maintain our own freedom if we withdraw, if we are isolationist, if we simply say we're going to come home and not be involved in leading as a leader around the world. You can't look at something like what's happening today with Russia and Ukraine and say America is neutral in that. That's a front line in the war of freedom. And America must support Ukraine. And it's been one of the really stunning developments for me when I look at the Republican Party as the party of Reagan, the party that essentially won the Cold War. And you look now at what I think is really a growing Putin wing of the Republican Party. And you see news outlets like Fox News running propaganda. You watch it not just on Tucker Carlson's show, although he is the biggest propagandist for Putin on that network. But you see it on many of their shows. And you really have to ask yourself, whose side is Fox on in this battle? And how could it be that you have a wing of the Republican Party that thinks that America would be standing with Putin as he conducts that brutal invasion of Ukraine? So I think that American patriotism fundamentally is about a love of freedom, and it's about understanding and educating ourselves about what that means and the duties that brings with it.
It's beautiful. Thank you. There should be a handheld mic coming, and please do keep your questions concise so we can get to as many as possible. The gentleman in the fourth row.
Hi, my name is Nathan McCory, and I just first of all want to say thank you so much, Congresswoman Cheney, for standing for and fighting for things I hold very dear. Thank you for your true patriotism. My question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My question is for Republicans who feel alienated by the Trump tilt of the Republican Party. What is the best avenue for them to pursue to promote good change? Is it to join a third party with moderate Democrats? Is it to stay within the party and work to affect change within? What do you see as the best avenue for those Republicans?
Yeah, I think that I'm not ready to say we're going to allow Trump and those who are at war with democracy to hijack our party. I'm not ready to give that fight up. I think that the party is in a very bad state. It's increasingly challenging, but I believe in a Republican Party that stands for the ideals that we've been talking about. And I think that individually, Republicans need to be engaged in battling for precinct, chairmen and chairwomen seats. I was talking to Rick Davis earlier, and he was telling me that 70% of the offices here in Arizona go unchallenged in elections. And I think that, if you look at what the anti-democratic forces in the Republican Party are doing, they have a very concerted effort underway to take control at a local level, at a state level, and to fundamentally turn the Republican Party into something that is anti-American. And I think that those of us who love the ideals and believe in the ideals the party has stood for have to be engaged on the ground in that battle, to challenge them, to fill those seats, to make sure that at a state level, we don't watch this slip away. And again, I go back to the choice that Arizona voters have this election cycle. And I say this as somebody who, my first vote I ever cast, I was 18 years old and I voted for Ronald Reagan. So for almost 40 years now, I've been voting Republican. I don't know that I have ever voted for a Democrat. But if I lived in Arizona now, I absolutely would. And for governor and for Secretary of State. And I think, you know, we cannot be in a position where we elect people who will not fundamentally uphold the sanctity of elections. And I think that's got to be, you know, more important than anything else. I also think it's important for us as Republicans to demand from our Republican leaders that they not accept this unraveling of the democracy, to demand that people, you know, people should not come here. Glenn Youngkin should not come here and campaign for Kari Lake. Ted Cruz, who absolutely knows better, absolutely knows that what he's advocating is unconstitutional, that what she's saying is unconstitutional. They know it. And as Republicans, there have to be consequences. And we have to make sure that people understand that we're going to vote for those that we can trust and depend on to do the right thing and to uphold their oath.
Great question. Perfect. The microphone's coming.
In the second row over there.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do. I was wondering if you could help us voters. Have you noticed patterns of specific character traits or behaviors that lead to more serious representatives, people that you think will put America first before their own party?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that you know, and this goes back before 2016, but I think certainly, you know, Trump has made it worse. There's a sort of a level of, we have come to accept from our elected officials things we would never accept from anybody else, from anybody in our family, from anybody who works with us, I mean, from a boss or an employee. And so some of it is just basic fundamental when you are trying to decide who to vote for. Number one, we need to make sure we have competent people running, but then you need to vote for the competent people. And you know, if you demand excellence in other areas of your life, I think, you know, we all become exhausted by politics. We could become exhausted by the yelling and the screaming and by the politicians you can't trust. And I think that as voters across the country on both sides of the aisle, we have to understand the country's at the edge of an abyss. You know, that's not overstating the danger we're facing. And if we don't decide that we're going to pull back from that, that we're going to vote for the serious people, that we're going to hold our elected officials accountable, that we aren't going to accept appeasement of anti-democratic forces, you know, then we're going to go over the edge. And so both in how we vote, how we conduct ourselves, what we demand, and also, you know, just run for office. I can't state that enough. We need people who care and who are responsible and competent to get into these races. And it's going to be a battle. You know, this is not something I think, unfortunately, that we're going to solve in one cycle. It's going to be a battle for a long time, but those who are fighting to unravel our democracy need to know absolutely with total clarity that those of us who are fighting to maintain our freedom, to maintain our constitutional republic, are stronger and more dedicated and have more determination than they do, and that we're going to win.
I think one of the biggest things we've seen from this last cycle is really that it takes so much more than just voting. And so one of the things I just love to plug for this room, Congresswoman Cheney alluded to it, but you can volunteer as a poll worker. And in fact, we need a lot more young poll workers. So powerthepolls.org is an amazing organization. You can go see where you can volunteer in your area, get trained. It's a paid job too. So if that's something you are interested, definitely make sure to check that out. And then there are two statistics I'd love for the young people in the room to take home. One, over 70% of races in 2020 went uncontested, like Rick said, like Congresswoman Cheney said. That means there's just no competition for over 70% of races, which means if you want to run, you will create some competition, which means it will be further advanced on the things you care about. And especially,
one more?
Yeah, of
Sorry,
course.
I was just thinking one more thing, Sophia, while you were talking. For the young people in the room, know that you're, as I said before, incredibly blessed in Arizona to have role models and mentors. There are people here that we've talked about who are trying to unravel our democracy, but you also have people who have been unbelievably brave and have done the right thing in the face of huge pressure. And learn about those people, watch the testimony in our hearings, talk to them, and understand, that when their time of testing came, both here in Arizona, we saw the same thing in Georgia, we saw the same thing in Michigan. When the time of testing came for these statewide officials, they, in the face of tremendous pressure, did not yield. And that is just a role model for all of us and for all of our children.
Absolutely. Only 6% of state legislators in America are under the age of 35. So if you want your states and your governments to work more for the things that you care about, you have to run. And with that, we'll do another question. There's a young woman in the third row.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Cheney. You're such an inspiration to me. Well, I'm a student here at ASU. I'm an MPA student, and part of my studies have been trying to find ways to combat political polarization, just in general, but also on social media. So what's one actionable step that all of us can take here, either today or tomorrow, to try and just rid of this polarization once and for all?
Yeah, I think there's not a silver bullet. I think it's a hugely important thing that you're focused on. And I think there are several things we can do. One is there's absolutely cancel culture on our college campuses, no question. And conservatives face that cancel culture in a way that is a huge detriment to the academic environment. When young people go to college, you want them to have their views challenged. You show up at college and you want to know you're going to be engaged in debates and discussions, and you're going to learn new things, and you may change your views on things, but it's that vigorous debate that is so important on our campuses. And today, too often conservative views are canceled, and we all have to work against that. We all have to make sure that we're providing a place where people really can have that kind of exchange of views. The other thing I would say is, when I first got to Congress, I spent a lot of time when we were voting, when the House of Representatives votes, especially if you have a whole series of votes, many times you'll find all of the members on the floor. And I would go around and just sit next to members that I didn't know on both sides of the aisle and introduce myself, meet them, and ask them about their stories and how they came to be in Congress. And without exception, that experience was one of, it just made me really proud to be an American, because there are so many viewpoints and perspectives, people that I may have disagreed with on everything, but they were in Congress for the right reasons. And they were there because they wanted to serve the nation. They wanted to serve their constituents. And I think those kinds of conversations are so important. And finding people that you disagree with and making an effort to sit and talk to them really matters. I think social media, understanding the extent to which the social media companies have logarithms that will drive people into more and more radical places, understanding the damage that can be done, as well as the tremendous tool social media is. We have to educate ourselves and think about where we're getting our news, how we're getting our news. Understand that there are foreign adversaries who want to create the kind of division that we're seeing in this country today, and not falling prey to it. But I also think that, we do have very real and important policy debates. So I don't think we should think, it's going to be all kumbaya, we're all going to agree on everything. But to sort of do right by the policies that you believe in, do the homework and understand, why you believe those things. I'll tell you one story. I was in a debate on the House floor about energy policy, and the congressman on the other side was Congressman Cicilline, who's a friend. He's a Democrat, but a lot of respect for him. And so we were in this debate, and I said in the debate, I believe that fossil fuels are a national treasure. I represent Wyoming. Thank you, Stephen. It's a resounding applause for that. But Wyoming is the largest coal producing state in the country. Our fossil fuels are very important. So I said this, we were having this debate, and when the debate got over, he came over to me on my side of the aisle and he said, I just have to ask you about something. And I said, what is it? He said, did you say fossil fuels are a national treasure? And I said, I believe that. And he said, I don't know that I've ever met anybody who believes that before. and I thought, but it was really, it was a vigorous debate. It was a great exchange of views. And that's what serves the nation, is understanding there are principles we won't, be willing to give on or compromise on, but there are big issues on which we can find common ground to move forward together.
Absolutely. With Mike, perfect. That gentleman on the far left.
Congresswoman, when you were a third ranking member in the 115th to 116th Congress, this country was really thriving. We saw record low unemployment for women and minorities, record highs for the stock market. How do you propose in the next Congress, if the Republicans take the House, how can Leader McCarthy advance an agenda similar to yours that provided our country so much success?
Well, I think that the presidency matters. I think that policies like the ones that you're talking about are set from the White House. And I think that, the policies that you're talking about in terms of tax policy, for example, in terms of unemployment policy, those characterized a lot of the policies of the Trump administration. And, I think it's important to recognize that philosophically, things like low taxes, things like a strong national defense, those things really matter. And I think that who we elect as president really matters. There's not a lot one house of Congress can do. I think, though, that as we do those things, to get to being able to implement the kinds of policies that I think the country needs, the Republican Party has to be in a position where we can actually win the popular vote in a presidential election. We have not won the popular vote in a presidential election as Republicans since 2004. And when you think about, if you say, all right, these are the policies I think are right for the country, you have to be able to get people to trust you, to believe that they will support you, that they will support those policies that you're going to implement. You've got to be in a position where you can win elections. And I think one of the real tragedies that we face today is that the Republican Party, instead of saying, we are going to be focused on those substantive policies that we believe in, has embraced Donald Trump and is doing everything they can to try to excuse and explain away or enable his behavior. And it's a tragedy because of what it does constitutionally to the country. And it's a tragedy because it means that we're not out there talking about, what it's going to take to meet the other challenges and the threats that we face. So I think that all of these issues of substance and policy are ones that are going to be decided in large part by whoever the next president of the United States is. And I think that it's going to be crucially important that that we elect people at all levels that we can trust, and when we elect a president, you hand that person the security and the safety of the nation. You really are saying to them, okay, we're going to put this in your hands. We're going to trust you to do what's right for our country. There's a prayer that's inscribed over the fireplace in the dining room in the White House. And it's a prayer that John Adams wrote. And it says, may none but honest and wise men ever inhabit this house. And I know he also meant women, but it's a really important thing to keep in mind as we're voting.
Thank you. Do you have the mic? Amazing. We'll do this gentleman in the second row. And then just so I have time check, how many more questions can we do? Okay, perfect.
Thank you for your talk. So my question is sort of about messaging. So I think politics is as much about storytelling as it is about policy. And with the divisive rhetoric that we see now and how political parties and figures are choosing to both speak to the people and also speak in ways such as funding. So like the Democrats, I know some Democrats funded like Carrie Lake. So how do we ethically message? How do we ethically tell stories in a way that's not divisive or not deceiving?
Yeah, in politics, it can be very easy, especially I think in Congress, to sort of say, okay, we're dealing with, let me pick an issue like tax policy. And to sort of say, all right, what are the talking points? What are the Democratic talking points, or what are the Republican talking points? What are my talking points? And I think that, again, it comes down to voters demanding more than that. And I look, you can tell when you talk to a politician if they're spinning. You can tell when you listen to somebody or you see somebody on television if they're giving you talking points. And it takes a lot of time to get to a place where you can demand more from them. But I also think, it's about having a commitment to substance, having a commitment to choosing people who can explain what they believe. And at the end of it, you might say, thank you. I, appreciate that you took the time to explain what you believe. And I totally disagree with what you just said, which is great. And then, you can have an exchange about it. But watch politicians. And when you watch them, think about that. Think about, like, if I were sitting across the table from this person, would I think they were just spinning me? Or would I think they were actually giving me a thoughtful answer to my questions? And politics is about incentives. And so if politicians are incentivized to say crazy things, they'll say crazy things. And I think that's why we really do have to get back to a place where people that are actually engaged in substance are incentivized. And that means, with votes.
Perfect. This gentleman in the first row.
Thank you so much. My name's Tim. I'm an honor student here at ASU. And I've learned a lot in college. I failed a lot and I now have started to see some success. And one of the things that I've learned about failure as I've gone through is the integrity to be able to hold your head up when you lose. So in your eyes,
I'm a little familiar with that.
Of course, you're a shining example of a person that I see a lot of integrity in. But as we look forward as young voters, what are some of the key aspects of integrity and some of the strengths of like future generation Congress people who would be running for? What are some of the integrity characteristics that you would see in them?
Yeah, I guess I go back to it's not all that different from what you would be looking for, what you expect from your friends or from your neighbors, how we treat each other. I think that when you're thinking about integrity in elected officials, it's really important to ask yourself a question about what would they do when the chips are down? What would they do when they're tested? And we've lived through, seeing how people operate, and human nature doesn't change. But it's nonetheless disappointing when you see the extent to which, the easy path of sort of putting politics first was such a popular path. But, I think that demanding the kind of substance and honesty that we've been discussing is really important. I think committing yourself to, think about running and committing yourself at whatever level it is, to being educated about those issues and the challenges. When I talk to young people about running, I think often about a story of my dad, who I wrote a book with my dad, or I helped him write his memoirs in 2008 and 2009. And as we were doing that, he told me stories that I had never heard before, which was kind of amazing when you think about, gone all those years, when he had stories I hadn't heard. But one of them was he talked about being a young man at the University of Wyoming in 1963. And he'd flunked out actually twice of Yale, but that's another story for another day. But he was back at the University of Wyoming. He'd only been there for a few weeks, and John F. Kennedy came to speak. And President Kennedy spoke in the field house at the campus at Laramie. And so my dad told me this story, and he told me that after the speech, he ran out the back of the field house with, hundreds of the students, and they saw President Kennedy's motorcade go by. Of course, he was assassinated just a few months later. But my dad said it was the first time that he thought about public service, that he thought about a career in public service. And I went back and I would recommend people do this. You can Google that speech, and you can hear the audio of what President Kennedy said. And it's really moving thing to do, because he talks about young people he talked about what the Greeks defined as happiness. And it was, excellence along sort of the best uses of your talents to achieve excellence. And he said, there's no path that will provide that for you more clearly than serving this nation. And I think it's just such an important message, and it's one that the blessing of being an American is that that you can influence our government, that you can be a leader, you can decide what laws we live under, and you have the opportunity to do that. So I would say both in how you conduct yourself and in what you demand from the people you vote for, those fundamental lessons of integrity really, really matter.
Such a perfect last question to end on. So thank you. And I also just want to plug for all the students in the room. There will be more conversations like this. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I am where I am today because I went to a room like this and I heard from Senator McCain. And today you got to hear from Congresswoman Cheney that will hopefully perhaps change the trajectory of your future. So please join me in thanking Congresswoman Cheney.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you all. Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for participating in this conversation. Thank you, Congresswoman Cheney. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you to the ASU leadership, to my colleagues at the McCain Institute, especially Davis White, who orchestrated all of this. And I hope all of you leave this room feeling really empowered and really inspired, and that you go and you act in your best possible U.S. citizen behavior. Thank you.
A spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance cannot be paralyzed by fear. We cannot give up on ourselves and on each other. We stand for truth against falsehood, freedom against tyranny, right against injustice, hope against despair. I believe we must always stand up for if we do not,